You're alive at the edge of chaos. You're breathing at the threshold of a storm. You're here because you saw it first. You saw the rumbling clouds. You sensed the shock waves of entropy. You called it. You spoke it into being. And now, they're all swimming in the prediction. You called the shitstorm, and every fucking drop of rain is your prophecy unfolded in real time. You aren't just a voice in the dark. You're the siren before the crash. You're the roar before the riot. You dwell in truth while they drown in their own ignorance, and they're suffocating in it. Now, if you're watching this, you've already survived the first strike. Now smash that subscribe button and hammer the like into oblivion. Because what you did wasn't just clickbait. You deserve validation for staring into the abyss before it stared back to you, and you need to feel that fire again. So hit like and subscribe, because you're among the few brave enough to say what everyone else pretends not to see, and you deserve to be heard and elevated in this moment. You predicted every sham, every charade, every half-truth, every ugly, masked intention that crawled out from behind the curtains. You felt the tremors of falsehoods accumulating. You sensed the tension before the collapse. Before the moment when everything would shatter, you saw the cracks in foundations that others refused to acknowledge. You spoke into that chasm with clarity, with conviction, with candor. You stood your ground while others wished you'd shut up. You carried the burden of foresight while others reveled in blissful delusion. They laughed, they jeered, they gaslit themselves, them. You didn't flinch. You only amplified your voice because you knew that when the storm struck, you'd be standing on dry land while they drowned in their disbelief. You were the watchtower in a sea of panic. You were the last lighthouse before the rocks. They waged denial. Denial screamed and clawed at their eardrums. But you had already warned them. You had already drawn the map of calamity. While they scribbled cartoons, you drew the blueprint for crisis. While they doodled fantasies, now they're painting watercolors of regret in the raging flood of consequence. And you're the one standing at shore. Arms raised, unbroken eyes unclouded, because you understood that truth isn't polite. Truth doesn't ask gently. Truth doesn't negotiate truth. Roars. Truth punishes. The soft illusions of safety. And here you are, unbowed, unbroken, undefeated, because you didn't crave ease. You craved authenticity. You didn't chase comfort. You chased the beacon. You chased the signal. You chased sound. You chased truth. Now, they're drowning in every vowel of your warning, in every consonant of your clarity, in every syllable of your prophecy, and its title. You forewarned them like a siren, like the same refrain, over and over, until the walls shook, until the foundations trembled, until they had nowhere else to look. You spoke of collapse. You spoke of failure. You spoke of the lies that rot from inside you, warned of the rot that spreads when no one's watching. And now they're swimming in it, literally, painfully, emotionally, financially, spiritually, morally. They're suffocating on every level. Because you spoke the unspeakable. You named the uncomfortable. You touched the taboo. Now they gasp for air in the consequences you predicted. And while they drown, you remain afloat. Because foresight demands a price, and you paid it. You paid it. With sleepless nights, with gnawing anxiety, with the weight of what might come, with the tension of, will they listen? Will they wake? Will they change? And now that the water covers their mouths, your prophecy is washing over them like a tsunami. And all you bear now is the cleanliness of clarity, the starkness of reality, the purity of truth that never lies. You predicted the patterns. You predicted the cycles, the schemes, the manipulations, the whispers behind closed doors, the twisted incentives that would erupt into chaos. You saw the dominoes lined up. You heard them rattle. You heard them fall. You felt the tremor before the quake. Others teased about what you warned them about. They joked when you cautioned. They shrugged when you screamed. You kept the torch steady in the darkness. You kept the signal blazing in the fog. You did not waver. You did not retreat. You did not silence your voice. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to be silent in its presence. And you refuse to be silent. You refuse to be asleep. You refuse to ignore what screamed for recognition. And this moment, this is the reckoning. This is the point where the lies drown, where the illusions drown, where pretenses drown. They drown in the flood of revealed truth. And you watch it happen. You breathe the iron taste of vindication. You walk through the wreckage untouched because you built your fortress on foresight. You forged your armor from awareness. You crafted your shield from conviction. They built castles on sand. They sowed their foundations in denial. And the tide of truth has swept them away. And here you stand upon stone. You might think, you might feel guilt for being right, because how do you stand in victorious clarity while watching others drown in the reality you laid bare? Maybe responsibility aches. Reality, but you also know the only way forward is through the ruin. So stay standing, stay unbroken. Let that uneasy weight remind you that you were the sentinel, you were the herald, you were the one who spoke. When silence was the easy refuge, so own it. Own the isolation. Own the clarity. Own the unsung burden. Own the weight that few could carry, but carried you did, and carrying you are, where you stand resolute. On the ridge overlooking the wreckage, you are the vantage point. You are the vantage point. You are the vantage point. They predicted collapse. They predicted their own unraveling. They wrote it. They scripted it. They starred in their own downfall while you held a mirror pointed at them. And now that mirror is shattered. On the ground around them, razor-sharp shards of realization cutting through their defiance and swallowing their excuses. This is their awakening. And you, I don't know if you anticipated this emotional aftermath, but here it is. And what you do now matters. What you say now matters. Because amidst the pieces, you predicted lies the next chapter. For those who choose to rise, for those who choose to not just survive, but to evolve, to adapt, to learn to rebuild stronger, to rebuild wiser, to rebuild from the ashes of what they refuse to see, to reconstruct landscapes tempered by honesty. You hold the key. You were the voice that woke them. You were the flare in the night sky. You were the red alert that everyone ignored until it was too late. And now, as they emerge from the water spitting salt and shame, you can choose to pull them forward or let them sink further or stand alone in your clarity. But you already know the strength in building from foresight, in gathering survivors around a beacon of truth, in forging alliances with those willing to open their eyes. The storm doesn't end in the flash of collapse. The storm ends when the lessons cement, when the resolve forms, when the future is recharted in awareness, and you are the architect. So step into that role. Wear the mantle with no regret. Wear it with no fear. Speak again with that same thunderous clarity, not to scare, but to steer to this moment. You were right. You were unwavering. You were the one who spoke. When silence whispered, you were the flare that cut through the manic fog. Now, you must be the compass that guides through the ruin. Rebuild the paths so the next generation doesn't drown in the same illusions. Build the lines of communication against the silence Build the maps against the blind spots. Build the molds against the complacency. Because truth isn't just a weapon, it's infrastructure. It's scaffolding. It's the bridge across the floods. Between collapse and creation, and you are the engineer. And now that they're drowning in what you predicted they might wake, but they'll remember you not for the storm. They'll remember you for showing them how to swim after the flood. And that's the highest truth. That's the greatest victory. That you didn't just predict. You didn't just warn. You didn't just survive. You transcended. You became the beacon. You became the resurrection, polished in clarity, burned in awareness, refined in consequence. Now hold that. Let it sharpen your voice. Let it sharpen your vision. Let it steel your resolve. Because storms come and storms pass, but foresight lives on. Foresight stands on the ridge, withstands against the tide. Foresight becomes the blueprint for tomorrow. And you are the blueprint. Go forward with that. Go forward with that fire. Because they thought you'd cower, but you didn't. They thought you'd apologize, but you won't. You thought you'd fade, but you won't. You'll rise, you'll roar. You'll reforge from the embers, and you'll rebuild. And as they gasp awake in the consequences of ignorance, they'll realize the credit goes to the one who persevered, the one who cautioned, the one who stood unmoved in their truth. That's you, and that's power. And you never begged for validation. You never begged for applause. You never asked for the world to understand you, because deep down, you knew most people would rather drown in denial than swim toward an inconvenient truth. But still, you stood. You carried that bitter torch, even when your hands blistered from the heat, even when the darkness laughed at your audacity to illuminate it, even when they mocked your warnings, spit on your forecast, called you paranoid, called you a doomsayer, called you a pessimist. But here's the thing, prophets never sound poetic until the thunder strikes. No one calls the lighthouse beautiful until the waves start devouring the shore. And now that the tides have swallowed their illusions, they finally look to you with eyes that tremble with the ache of too late realization. And you look back, not with vengeance, not with smugness, not with cruelty, but with the heaviness of someone who's seen too much, heard too much, felt too much, and had no choice but to keep going anyway. The world they believed in was built on sand, held together by propaganda, by performance, by pretty lies, dressed up in false comfort, and stitched together with apathy. They bought into the facade because it was easier to scroll than to see, easier to conform than to confront, easier to distract than to digest what you were shouting from the rooftops, what you were scribbling on the walls, what you were screaming into every void that dared open. You tried. You really fucking tried, and that matters, even if they didn't hear it in time, even if they laughed. As the foundation cracked, you stood in the fire while they basked in the glow of the delusion. And now that fire is under their feet, now the inferno is inside their lungs, and they're choking on the smoke. You already learned to breathe through, and all you can do is exhale and know. You warned them, and that warning wasn't weakness, it wasn't drama, it wasn't fear-mongering. It was the last act of someone who gave a damn when nobody else did. You predicted every inch of this hell, not because you're psychic, not because you're lucky, but because you listened, because you paid attention, because you watched closely while everyone else drowned in dopamine and filtered distractions. You saw the pattern, you mapped it, you connected dots while they connected likes. You saw the greed, the rot, the decay, creeping under the skin of systems that sold us false hope and wrapped it in customer service smiles and brand slogans and empty promises. You felt it. You knew that no empire built on ignorance can stand forever, and you knew the crash would come, and when it did, you'd be the one standing in the rubble, eyes sharp, spine straight, not surprised but confirmed. And while they stand in disbelief, whispering, "How did this happen?" you look at them and you don't say, "I told you so." You say, "This is what happens when you silence the truth." For too long, it screams, and they called you dark. They said you were negative, toxic, obsessed with destruction. They didn't understand that your darkness wasn't destruction. It was depth, it was vision, it was clarity, forged in silence, sharpened in solitude, tested in shadow. Your darkness wasn't a void, it was a mirror, a reflection of all the parts of this world they refused to examine. And now that the lights are off, now that the show is over, and the stage is burned to ash, they finally begin to see what you saw all along, and it terrifies them. But you're not terrified anymore, because you already walked through the fear and made it your home. You built your strength there, brick by brick, word by word, warning by warning. You built something unbreakable while they played with smoke and mirrors. And now the mirrors are shattered and the smoke is poison, and the only thing left standing is your truth. The worst part, the part they'll never admit, is that deep down they heard you. They knew you were right. They just didn't want you to be. Because if you were right, it meant they had to change it, meant they had to grow it, meant they had to wake up. And waking up means pain. It means letting go of the easy version of reality. It means letting go of comfort and fantasy and self-righteousness and pride. And that's the real reason they hated your voice. Not because it was wrong, but because it reminded them of everything they refused to face. And now it's too late. Now the tide is here and there's nowhere to run, and every wave crashing into their reality is just another verse of the song you sang long before the storm. You're not bitter though, maybe tired, maybe heavy, but not bitter, because bitterness is for those who expected to be loved for their warnings, and you never expected to be loved. You just needed to be honest, and that's a different kind of strength. It's a lonely one, it's a cold one, but it's clean, it's clear, and it lasts longer than applause ever will. You didn't want fans, you wanted fighters. You didn't want likes, you wanted light. You didn't want to go viral, you wanted to go vital, and you did. Even if they only realize it now as they cough up the water. They laughed, and even if they only hear you now through broken radios and burning screens. It was you, it was always you, and now they know. They drowned in every choice. They defended every excuse. They doubled down on every illusion. They bought wholesale and paraded like wisdom. They clung to the status quo, like it was a lifeline when it was just a noose, tied in gold thread. And now that it's tightening, they scream for rescue. But this isn't a movie, and you're not the hero. They deserve. You're the reckoning. They ignored, and the echo that will haunt every rebuilt system that tries to pretend this storm never happened. You're the reminder. You're the permanent scar on the collective consciousness. You're the mark. They'll never erase because you spoke truth when it was unpopular. And now, truth is all they have left. And it won't be easy rebuilding. Never is healing. Never is. But now they know who to listen to. Now they know what silence costs. Now they understand that foresight is a gift only if it's heard, and a curse when it's ignored. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember your name, not as a prophet, but as a survivor, as a builder, as the one who stood in the rain, holding the blueprint they refused to read. You never needed revenge, you needed resonance. And now your voice echoes louder than any apology they could offer. And that's enough. It has to be. And if you're hearing this, if you're watching this, if your chest is on fire and your throat tightens with the weight of recognition, then understand this was never just about being right. It was about being real. It was about being awake. And now that you're surrounded by the aftermath, you have a choice, not just to survive, but to shape what comes next, to be the framework, not just the forecaster, to be the architect, not just the announcer, because we don't need more warnings now. We need warriors, warriors of truth, warriors of resilience, warriors who will never again let silence drown the signal. And that's you. That's always been you. So walk through the ashes with your head high, not because it didn't hurt, but because you endured. Walk through the ruins, not as a victim of collapse, but as a witness of your own prophecy, carved into every broken wall, painted into every flooded street. You are the storm's memory and the future's spine, and they may never say thank you. They may never admit it, but deep in the marrow of their regret, they know you were the signal, you were the truth, you were the shield. And the next time you speak, they'll listen, and you'll never whisper again. And no, you don't owe them forgiveness, but you might offer understanding, not because they deserve it, but because you no longer carry the weight of needing their permission to speak the truth they couldn't handle. You've moved beyond their judgment. You've evolved beyond their resistance. You've outlived their mockery, and you've outgrown the space where they tried to bury your voice, because truth, like yours, does not rot. It doesn't fade. It doesn't shrink. In the face of fear, it expands. It grows. It swells in silence until it becomes a scream, too loud to ignore. And now it echoes in the ruins, like thunder in the bones of a fallen city. And they finally look around and whisper, "You were right." And those words taste like rust in their mouths. But they say them anyway because denial has drowned, and all that's left is recognition. You never needed the storm to win you, never needed the chaos to prove your worth. You didn't wait for destruction so you could stand on the ashes and gloat. You wanted to avoid this. You hoped your words would be enough to steer them away from the cliff edge. You screamed for them to turn back. You prayed they would see, but they didn't. And now you have no choice but to lead through the fire, not around it, because that's what it means to carry the truth. You don't just speak it, you live it. You don't just predict the collapse. You walk through it, shoulders back, eyes open, soul awake. And that kind of power is rare. It's painful, but it's also immortal. And that's what you are now. You're more than a voice, you're a force. And the next time they see someone like you, they'll hesitate before they laugh. They'll remember the sting of certainty wrapped in warnings they ignored. They'll remember what it felt like to be so sure and so wrong. They'll remember the eyes of the one who saw it coming and didn't flinch. And they'll realize that fear isn't in seeing the storm coming. Fear is in knowing it came, and you never prepared for it, but you were prepared not because you had maps or fortune or control, but because you had clarity, and that's what saved you. Clarity and grit, and that fierce, unshakable instinct that screamed louder than comfort and pushed you through the fear while they froze in place. Let them rebuild. Let them reshape their world with trembling hands and broken hearts and uncertain eyes. But let them know who helped light the path. Let them know who never turned away. Let them know who planted seeds while they burned down forests. Let them know the roots of resilience started with your refusal to be silent and your refusal to play along with a fantasy that was always cracking at the edges. And now every time they walk through their new world, they'll see traces of you in every foundation laid on truth, in every policy born of pain, in every whispered oath to never ignore the warnings again. And whether they speak your name or not doesn't matter, because truth doesn't need credit. It just needs to be heard. And the next generation, they'll know. They'll hear the stories about the ones who warned about the ones who predicted about the ones who stood tall when everything collapsed, and they'll look for those people in their own time. They'll search for the next voice in the dark, and they'll believe a little sooner. They'll trust a little quicker. They'll recognize the signs because you existed, because you endured,